The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book. Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read. Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening. Hello, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews, and we are back for another live stream, live reading tonight, continuing with Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Era. It's a 1970 publication written by Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was National Security Advisor during the Jimmy Carter administration. He went on to collaborate with David Rockefeller in founding the Trilateral Commission, which is a think tank privately run, which exists to this day and was set up with the purpose of fostering and improving and consolidating relationships between the US and Europe and Japan back in the 70s and the 80s and continuing through to this day. So thank you for being here tonight for this live stream reading. If you are tuning in live, that is wonderful indeed. If you're watching on the replay, there's a pinned comment below the video with timestamps. I literally just put up the pinned comment for last week's video on last week's videos just before this live stream went out. But I'll try and get the pinned comment up there for you a little bit faster this week. But yes, it is good to have you here. Indeed. And what a book this has been and proving to be. It's incredibly interesting. And I keep flicking through and reviewing some of the quotes that I've underlined and things that I've picked out. And it is truly amazing what he committed to paper and was allowed to publish back in the 60s and the 70s. The book was published by Viking Compass, and I haven't heard of them other than getting this book published. I don't think I have any other books from the Viking Press. So maybe they were just not being observed closely enough when they committed this book to print. If you try and track down copies of it, there aren't new editions being made available. There's really only secondhand editions from the 70s and the 80s, and they're pretty pricey. They're overpriced. And you can occasionally find a cheaper one and snap that up, which is what I did, and I was very fortunate indeed to get this copy. But for the most part, if you want a physical copy of this book, you're looking at $50, $100, maybe $200. So it's not a book they want out there. They're not reprinting it and updating it and allowing smaller publishing houses to acquire the rights and make their own hardback copies to put out there. No, there's a bit of a control over how many copies of this are allowed to exist and be spread around. So we're very fortunate to have a copy in the Hayes Reviews library, and we're very fortunate as well to be able to broadcast this and read it. We're here for part 6 tonight. We are about 70 pages into the book, 75 to be exact. And this is the slowest pace we've ever moved through a book on this channel before, but there's so much to digest. It's incredibly academic. It's quite abstract in certain places, and he deals with some very complex ideas, and the language is quite tricky to get your head around, and to read it on the fly and to comment on it. It is quite a task, but I'm enjoying it, and I'm rising to the challenge, and I'm doing my best. So we started part 2 last Friday, and in that section, Zbigniew is talking about how we need a universal vision. And this universal vision, presumably, is going to be what allows the peoples of the earth to unite, to transcend their nationalism, to move beyond their traditional religions and come together under one world system in order to prevent climate change from killing everybody. Something like that. He's definitely advancing the narrative that is out there, which is being used to advance a system of control, the likes of which we've never seen before. We have a lot of the building blocks already in place. We're already allowing our lives to be mediated by these, little black rectangles that we carry around that have all our data and our private information and track us and trail us and surveil us from dusk till dawn 24/7, right? It's only a matter of time before the system gets switched on, before we are not allowed to do what we're doing right now without handing over maybe a fingerprint or an eyeball scan or whatever biometric information it may be that is required of us. I just saw Melissa's joined. Good to have you here. And I know that you've spoken before about having a line in the sand, and that line being the point at which we are required to fork over some sort of biometric information in order to access the internet. And that time, it doesn't seem that far off to me. People are already unlocking their phones with scans of their face, which is insane to me. But what that means is all these new phones that have, like this one is this is a works phone, and I just use it to illustrate the point. But all phones now have a camera facing. Look, can you see it flashing there? See that little flashing? That's because it's constantly shooting out laser beams and scanning whatever's in front of it. So every time you pick this up and look at it, you're getting all these laser beams sort of shot out into your face. I can't make it do that again, but a lot of people don't know that. So we're being gradually nudged, encouraged, prompted, guided, conditioned, prepared for this system. I remember Alan Watts saying that using the cards to pay for things was training people to put their hand against a reader, some sort of chip reading device, right? The chip's in the card, so you hold the card up to the machine and you beep, and your money disappears out of your account and appears in someone else's account. But he said that was just training people to do the motion of putting their hand there. And eventually it won't be a card, it'll just be a hand, maybe a fingerprint or a chip in the hand under the skin, right? Beep, that's how you pay. You can just see how these things unfold, and people sleepwalk into it. Frank just said in the chat before we started the live stream, he's surprised that there aren't more people awake and paying attention and understanding what's going on in the world. Well, is that surprising? I'm not too surprised, because I only woke up to it and started paying attention and caring about it, is a better way to put it, 4 years ago. And it was only because of lockdowns and the Big C event and the insanity and the nonsense and the questions I had around that, which led me to find people who had evidence to back up their answers and weren't just throwing around fear porn and opinion and theory and conjecture and all the other stuff, and the clickbait type stuff as well, which we're seeing a lot of at the moment. So it doesn't surprise me too much, because I was very late to the party. And part of the reason why more people don't care is just because of the job that's been done on us. The mind control, the dumbing down, the chemical assault, the physical environments that have been manufactured, the herding of people into cities, the indoctrination, 15,000 hours of schooling that happens, Hollywood, Silicon Valley raping our minds, the technology which destroys our attention span and our ability to think, the job that's been done on our memories, long-term and short-term. It's full spectrum dominance. It's every single avenue and angle that you can even conceive of has been weaponized. That goes from religion to economics to finance to food to water to the weather, which he mentioned in this book, Weather Warfare, okay? the very air we breathe, the water that we drink, the food we eat, the media we consume, the films we watch, the music we listen to. That was a big red pill moment for me, if you want to call it that, was reading the trilogy of books by Mark Devlin, DJ Mark Devlin. The trilogy is called Musical Truth. And it's not a trilogy anymore, it's a quadrilogy because he just brought out a fourth volume. But Musical Truth, volumes 1, 2, and 3. It's a lot of reading. It's a lot of information. And he just basically lays out all of every conspiracy that you've ever heard of relating to music. So there's the sort of Paul McCartney replacement clone. There's the playing music backwards and encoding satanic messages in it. What else is there? There's the Copeland family, Stuart Copeland, drummer of the Police, his father being a CIA operative who wrote the book Game of Nations. That bit is probably one of the most important and interesting parts. A lot of it is conspiratainment, I will say. But realizing that music has been weaponized, that it is used to implant messages, which people then go around singing to themselves. I put a CD in the car the other day, and it was Newton Faulkner, who's a ginger, dreadlocked guy, plays acoustic guitar and does a bit of that tapping on it, like playing it and tapping it at the same time. And he is a bit of a one-hit wonder. He's got 4 albums out or something, but only one of his songs really made it anywhere. And the song came on, and the lyrics were, "I need something to believe in because I don't believe in myself. I'm sick and tired of going nowhere. I guess it'll all work out. I don't mind anymore." And I got that far in the song, and I just ejected the CD and turned it off, because these kind of lyrics, like, I don't believe in myself. Life's going nowhere. I can't get anywhere. I guess it'll just work out. I'm just like, I don't need to hear that. I don't need that implanted in my consciousness, because that messaging doesn't help me. Even if the music sounds good and it's catchy and it might capture a mood or a moment or a feeling that I have, or remind me, it's like it's putting words in my mind that are written in the first person, that are written by someone else, and it's making me repeat. I'm absorbing that message. I'm sick and tired. I guess it'll work out. And I just thought, no, I don't want that. So I just ejected it and got rid of it, put something else on. Or I think in that case, I just didn't listen to anything, because this is the weaponization of culture, and music, unfortunately, is part of that. And a lot of the music we hold dear and we care about and we love and we grew up with, and that we think is so important and central to our identity in many cases, is just layered with toxic messages, which we absorb and repeat to ourselves and go deep into our subconscious and our psyche. And it's a bit of a red pill moment to work that out and realize, goodness me. And it goes all the way back to the very inception of popular music, really. Mindhack says, a great book is Weird Scenes Inside the Canyon. I haven't read it, but I'm aware of the work done, and I've heard very good things about that author and his book. So I'm happy to mention that to people. I see we got Lee Blunt, Adam, and Turbs as well. Good evening to you all. I hope you are having a good week so far. So, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Between Two Ages. And to just finish off what I was saying about not being surprised that more people aren't awake and paying attention to these kind of things. When you realize the landscape is one of absolute domination of our minds and our hearts and our spirits and our physical bodies, and at the root of it all is an attack upon our humanity, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised that more people aren't resisting it and fighting back. I'm surprised anybody is. I'm surprised anybody knows about this stuff and cares about it. It's a miracle. It really is a miracle. It's a something inexplicable, something I've not been able to define or understand or or put my finger on or articulate. But some people just have that innate desire to know. They care about truth. They want to know truth. They recognize that there is such a thing as objective truth, regardless of what this Muppet tries to tell you. On I actually wrote it down, page 74, where he says truth is relative. He says, unwilling to accept the notion of the relativity and elusiveness of truth. Little side note there that he slips in. Yeah, truth is relative, well, no, I don't think it is. And I think a lot of us intuitively understand, realize, and know that truth is not relative. It is objective. It can be discovered. It can be worked out. It can be observed. It can be known. And those of us who realize that and have a strong enough intuition telling us that, we start to care about what is the truth, and then we develop a conscience, and we start to want to talk about what is true and what we believe to be true, and then it just kind of propels us on from there. But not everybody has that, and most people are just content in their culture that is designed by the social engineers and handed to them and keeps them busy. Let's be honest, like paying the bills and going to work and watching your favorite sports team and keeping up with your favorite soap opera and raising the children and cooking your meals and doing the shopping and all that other stuff. There's enough there to keep everybody flat out busy on the hamster wheel right up to the day they die. So that's another thing. It's about capacity. It's about who has the time. It's one thing to have the appetite, but then who has the actual time to read the books, to take in the documentaries, to listen to the talks and the lectures and the presentations, because that is a time-consuming pursuit. And what do you get at the end of it? Well, nothing material, okay? Nothing concrete that's going to make your life, quote-unquote, better necessarily, although I would argue it does, but it's more of a spiritual, metaphysical improvement and benefit that you receive there. But we've been conditioned and trained not to care about that dimension of reality. We're looking at the house we live in, the value of the car on the drive, the quality of the clothes that we wear, the nice places we get to go on holiday, the gadgets and the gizmos, the doohickeys, the toys that we get to buy and treat ourselves to when we get that paycheck every month, the promotion we might be looking at achieving. There's so much there which eclipses the truth that I'm not surprised, really. I go the other way, and I say it's an absolute mind-blowing surprise that I've got Frank and Lee and Tammy and Mindhack and Adam and Melissa in the chat tonight, and Turbs and R. Murray one as well. What's up? That to me is the surprise. So thank you all. It's great to have you here indeed. Let's cherish our time together while it lasts, and let's put our minds to some learning, which is what we're going to be doing very shortly. I have a confession to make. There's no preamble ramble tonight. This is the preamble ramble. It's just a ramble. There's no preamble. There's no plan. There's no materials. There's nothing to look at. There's nothing to talk through or dissect. I just haven't had time to put it together. But the reason I haven't had time is because I've been working feverishly on another project, which I really tried to get it ready so I could bring it to you tonight and announce it and let you all have it. I didn't get it done in time. And I was really working hard on it. I was doing late nights, in between changing nappies and feeding the baby and trying to get some sleep and eating meals and doing my job. And I made some really good progress on it, but I think it's going to be another week before I can actually just like announce it and give it out to everybody. So appreciate your patience. Thank you for understanding. And what we'll do tonight was we'll just dive straight into the book, and we'll see how far we can get, because we're not even halfway through it yet. We're not even halfway through it. And if last week's live stream was anything to go by, I have so many comments and things I want to say, and I got to a point where I was just commenting on every sentence pretty much. So that slows things down too. So I'm gonna leave it there. Tell you that there's a very exciting thing coming that I'm so excited. I've worked hard on it. I'm really eager to get it out. I have this, when I work on these kind of things, when I get obsessed with a little project, I just want to start giving it out and sharing it with people before it's ready. And I'm trying to resist that. I've already shared it with some people, a few people, because I'm like, hey, look, I did this thing. It's not ready, but look at it. I want you to see it, because I'm just chomping at the bit to get it out there. But for something that's like public facing, that goes out to you, your good selves, I want to make sure it's in a better place. So it's coming hopefully next week. Pencil that in, something interesting and exciting happening next Friday. With that said, let's get on with tonight's reading. I just see we've got Q-pom. I can't tell if it's Q-porn or Q-pom. I'm going to go with Q-pom because that's a word I prefer saying. I'm listening to your Milner Fabian conspiracy series. Mind-blowing. Having lived in Manchester for a decade, your channel is wild. Awesome. The book is mind-blowing, that book in particular. It's a real paradigm shifter, let's put it that way. And you're in Manchester, I'm in Manchester. Let's meet up and have a cup of tea sometime and a slice of cake. Why not? Adam as well is saying that these books are incredible. Yes, they are. That is absolutely true. We've got a very discerning audience, and we are very lucky to have the books that we have in the collection and the library. So between the audience and myself, we're picking and curating a really good curriculum for ourselves, which doesn't exist in a lot of places. Most of the people in the channels out there, they read the books, and then they tell you what's in the book and what it's about, and this is what happened, and that's all well and good. But we're going through it line by line together, and I think that's the unique value of what we're doing here. So with that said, let's go to the old book cam, pull that into frame, and we'll crack on tonight with our reading of Between Two Ages. I suppose I might say as well, before we do get into the book, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews, where you can find all my links. Because I usually say that at least once before we actually get into the book. Okay. Turn that way. So, the last section we looked at was about the quest for a universal vision. And Brzezinski came up with this really interesting notion that nationalism, there was a section on the universal religions, and then a section on the national identity. And then the last section of that was ideological universalism. And what he talked about was how nationalism and the big religions and Marxism all together sort of constitute a kind of trinity which humans are sort of built on. It was really weird. Like, he closed it by saying people in the West, almost everyone is to some extent Christian, nationalist, and Marxist. So there you are. We're all Christian, nationalists, Marxists. But again, he was writing this in the 70s, and this was right before the immigration really took off. So I don't think you could say this with so much confidence and boldness in 2025. Maybe half the people are Christian and the other half are, Islam, Muslim. It's getting wild. Big changes. So the date of the book is revealed in some ways by some of the observations and the comments he makes. But for the most part, a lot of it feels like it could have been written earlier this year even. Particularly the comments about technology and how it affects people. He did a real great analysis earlier in the book about how awareness of things that are happening all over the planet is just causing a major stress on the welfare and the well-being of the individual humans, and that we are kind of inundated with all this quote-unquote news from all four corners of the globe, as they like to say, as the saying goes, which is strange. Corners on a ball. But anyway, we're inundated with information and data, and it's paralyzing. It's overwhelming. It's confusing. And that is part of the warfare that's being waged upon our minds. And he did describe as well at one point how communication, audio, visual technologies could invade the living rooms of other countries by way of the television. And he talked about Americanism as a export, whereby Hollywood would concoct visual moving pictures and depict a culture that didn't really exist. It was all made up by the people who do that sort of thing. And then it was broadcast out across the world and used to manipulate minds, to drum up tension and hatred and jealousy, to move people from place to place, to depict this life that you could have if you made that journey to America, and where you could enjoy wealth and freedom and luxury and opportunity and all that sort of thing. Again, another weapon, and he used the word invade, and I really pounced on that, and I like to repeat it often and come back to it, because anytime you're interacting with a screen, your mind is being invaded, and you can let the invader in and recognize that they're not an invader. They're maybe somebody who's trying to help you, maybe a teacher or a guide or a friend or a companion, okay? But in a lot of cases, you have no idea who's written the material. You can't consciously analyze all the layers to it, the audio, the color, the quick, snappy changing of scenes. It goes in, it's planted into your subconscious mind, and you can never get it out. This is the thing. Once you have seen an image, it is in you, and in a very literal, maybe not literal, but in a very meaningful kind of true sense, it becomes part of you. And a great example actually on this week, sorry, I said my preamble ramble was over, but it's not. A great example of this is from this week. And I was talking about this in some of my Telegram chats that I'm part of. I avoid violence, whether that's on screens, I don't play computer games, but TV shows, films. If there's something gory coming up, I look away. I literally hide behind a cushion. I cover my eyes. I don't want those images in my mind. I had my fair share of that growing up. I watched the gory films, played the violent computer games, etc. Now, I don't want any more of that in my mind. I'm quite happy to live without looking at any gore, any violence on a screen. And then what happened the other day was, within a matter of hours, I saw two people being murdered. Two different videos, and on one of the videos I saw twice. One of the murders I saw from two different angles. So it was three videos all told, and these were just served up to me as a person who never looks for this kind of content, who is not interested in gore and violence, in all the divide and conquer games that are played out there. I don't search for any of that. So the algorithm should be totally attuned to be like, that guy doesn't want any of that stuff. We're not giving it to him. Just give him the gadgets for newborn babies and water filters. I get a lot of advertisements for water filters, and what else? And like, grow your audience by 10,000 in the next 30 days. Download our plan. That kind of stuff. I get a lot of that. Suddenly, 2 days ago, I got 3 videos of 2 different people being murdered, and my point of saying that is that I couldn't avoid seeing it because I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know the headlines, and so I'm like, okay, there's a guy sitting on a stage talking, and then you know what happens next, or here's a girl sitting on a bus, and then you know what happens next. And then I'm thinking, and I'm lucky that I've set both my phone to black and white, so I didn't see any color, and I didn't see any sound, hear any sound. So I was insulated a little bit, at least in that sense. But the point is that those images are now in my mind. I can recall them. I can play them back. I can think about them. And I'm aware of them. And I never chose to be. And you might say, oh, you chose to be because you used Instagram and Telegram. I'm like, fine. Yeah. Okay. But we're opening ourselves up to this kind of manipulation. And we are what's that saying? Is it? I think it's Alan who said the mind has no firewall. And if he didn't come up with that phrase, I've heard him say it. Whoever came up with it, whatever the origin, that is the crux of the matter. The mind has no firewall. We got to be so vigilant and careful and strict about what we let in to our minds, what we listen to, what we read, what we see, all of that stuff. It's so important now more than ever with the advanced AI that is being used and rolled out, with the attention economy, with the multiple hundreds of thousands of companies, influencers, talking heads, businesses, corporations, governments, operatives vying for our attention all the time when we interact with these little glowing rectangles. Okay. So cautionary tale, even if you don't seek out that sort of thing, you'll likely, when the time is right, when a certain event is being rolled out, when it's expedient to the people who manipulate us using all these technologies and these mediums and these media, there's really no way to avoid it or defend it against it apart from switching the bloody things off and living life elsewhere away from the screens in some way, shape, or form, and making sure you have time where you're not at the screen. And I sound like a real hypocrite saying this because I've done nothing but stand at my laptop working for the last sort of week, it feels like. But it's still true. Making time away from the screens to soak up some actual reality, face-to-face conversations, trees, grass, rivers, some nature, is critically, vitally important now more than ever. If you don't have that habit already, I would strongly suggest you pick it up and start working on it. Yes, Armory One says the Empire is turning up the heat. That's a very good way to put it, and I agree. It certainly feels that way. You know, in the boiling frog analogy, I think they just cranked it up to not quite 11 yet, but we're heading in that direction, I think. So, let's get on with part 2. This is part 2 of the book, or is it just chapter 2? Let me go back. I think we finished part 1 of the book, right? Because it has 5 parts. Yeah, so we're in part 2, chapter 2, which is turbulence within institutionalized beliefs. Let me just move my mic. It is increasingly difficult for institutions to assert dogmatically the pristine purity of the doctrines that they claim to embody. This is as true of the Christian churches as of communist parties. In some of the more advanced countries, this difficulty also involves, especially on the part of the young, a crisis in allegiance to the procedures of liberal democracy. Yeah, there's too much information flying around. Too much information flying around out there that these priests and politicians, they can't stand there with a straight face so much anymore and tell us that they are pure. Today, he says, the relationship of ideas to institutions is turbulent. Institutions resist ideas lest they lead to changes that undermine the institutions, and the exponents of ideas rebel against institutions because of the intellectual constraints said to be inherent in their existence. That's a very revolutionary thing to say, isn't it? What ideas exactly? Because not all ideas are equal. And I think there should be, like, ideas is where the battle should be taking place. People should be equipped to debate and discuss and exchange ideas. But unfortunately, we're not taught how to do that effectively. We're not taught how to submit to better ideas, how to root out and get rid of bad ideas that may have become part of our psyches and our personalities and our identities. So the battleground of ideas is really important, but we are not given the tools needed and the methodologies to properly, competently interact with ideas, I don't think, for the most part. Some of us can do it better than others. Some of us have no idea how to do it whatsoever. Anyway, going on, continuing. This development is part of the progressive secularization of our life. An important role in this process is played by the changed character of contemporary communications, which permits rapid dissemination of ideas and images and requires less reliance on an organized effort to proselytize. Today, more people are exposed to impressions that are both more fluid and more volatile than ever before. There is no longer the same need to challenge rigid and traditional taboos with alternative and more appealing visions, or to overcome social inertia with organized mobilization of effort. All this puts institutionalized beliefs on the defensive. More and more, their efforts are designed to retain the positive loyalty of their adherents and to combat influences that are inimical to structured, formalized, and highly institutionalized beliefs. Writing almost a century ago, Marx observed that, quote, up till now it has been thought that the growth of the Christian myths during the Roman Empire was possible only because printing was not yet invented. And I'll just mention as well that, seeing as he's quoting Marx, earlier in the previous chapter, Brzezinski talked about Judeo-Christian something. Yes, there. Page 73 talked about Judeo-Christian heritage. Now, this term I mentioned is not new, but prior to the 1930s wasn't really used. And then around the 1930s, people started using it. And there's a whole interesting history there about where it came from and who and why and what the story is. It's worth looking into. Just interesting that he's quoted Marx here, who was, of course, writing much earlier than the 1930s. And Marx does not use the term Judeo-Christian. He uses the term Christian myths. And that just kind of reinforces that point I was making. And I did put an interesting video in my Telegram channel about Judeo-Christian, the term, the history, where it came from. And that was from an author who has a bunch of books out on metaphysics. And yeah, quite a small channel, but very easy to understand video. What's his name? Some BJ Taylor or RJ Taylor, something like that. It's on the Telegram channel anyway, but yeah, there you go. When Marx was writing, it was just Christian myths, not Judeo-Christian myths. Quite interesting. But he said, up till now it has been thought that the growth of the Christian myths during the Roman Empire was possible only because printing was not yet invented. Precisely the contrary. The daily press and the telegraph, which in a moment spread inventions over the whole earth, fabricate more myths, and the bourgeois cattle believe and enlarge upon them in one day than could have formerly been done in a century. Yes, so now that we can print and there's an audience for newspapers and news, it becomes profitable to have sensational information to publish and to sell to people, because then you sell more papers, right? And this is, I think, kind of what he's getting at, is the fabrication of clickbaity, although it wouldn't have been clickbaity back then, but attention-grabbing headlines, sensationalism. This is very quickly would have been used, and because they would have worked out that if we do this, we can shift more units and get more money out of the pockets of the everyday man. Brzezinski continues, when to the press and telegraph is added the contemporary global role of radio and television, not to mention, the 2025 existence of internet, social media, and now AI mediated platforms, it's just gone. The problem has gone on in an exponential curve, really. But he says, when to the press and telegraph is added radio and television, and to religion are added contemporary ideologies, Marx's observations become even more pertinent. In addition to developments connected with the means of dissemination and the pace of technologically induced social change, another factor is at work. In the view of many concerned people, especially among the younger generation, the fusion of religions or ideologies with institutions has resulted in bureaucratic rigidity as well as distortion in values. The long tradition of institutionalized religion's concentration on the inner man has prompted social passivity and de facto indifference to concrete human dilemmas. In spite of stated commitments to humanitarianism, the more contemporary ideological preoccupation with mobilizing the external man has resulted in political systems whose practice refutes the moral significance of their often proclaimed humanitarian objectives. If in the first case the spiritual elevation of man has permitted his social deprivation, in the second the assertion of man's social primacy has precipitated his spiritual degradation. Okay. Yeah, so it's like the pendulum. He's sort of saying that back when people were all paupers living in the dirt, basically, the church and the priest were saying, well, don't worry about this, just care about your spiritual life, and in the next life when you die, you'll be a good person and, you know, donate to the church and work hard, and in the next life, in the great beyond, after you die, you'll get your rewards and you'll live in heaven with God, and everything will be hunky-dory for eternity. Good deal, right? And then that kind of swung the other way. People started caring about, I don't want to live in the dirt and be a pauper and pay my dues to the Lord down the way. And I want more material comfort. I want more, I want better working hours. I want fairer pay and better working conditions. And this preoccupation with the material, which was encouraged and guided and steered by the likes of the Fabian Society, for example, that then led to a neglect of the spiritual health and the spiritual well-being. And so the answer would be some sort of balance, right? Of course, you need to be safe, warm, protected from the elements, with food to eat and some sort of material safety and comfort, right? But you also need to care about your spirit, your soul, your humanity, and you need to engage in practices and behaviors which allow that to flourish and to be nourished as well. It's not just all about the material and the physical. And like any good dialectic, people tend to get steered into one or the other, and there's very few people out there that'll teach you or guide you or coach you into how to find that balance that is the real sort of narrow path that people would actually benefit from. So the next bit is institutional Marxism. Moreover, many people feel that both on the external, environmental level of human existence and on the inner, contemplative one, current institutionalized beliefs no longer provide adequate responses to contemporary problems. Despite the intellectual advance that Marxism represents in our thinking, it does not suffice as the sole basis for meaningful comprehension of our reality. Zbigniew seems like quite an open fan of Marx and his writings. Discoveries in modern science, advances in the study of the human psyche, and even contemporary socio-economic developments can no longer be satisfactorily interpreted by exclusive reliance on the Marxist framework. Oh, but he does admit that it's got shortcomings, and he did actually in the previous section mention that there were shortcomings, and he even talked about how when it was how did he phrase it now? Basically, he just talked about all the death and destruction that came out of building communism on top of Marxism. But let's continue. At the same time, the neglect of the spiritual element and the renewed search for the true nature of inner man a search made more urgent because of scientific developments concerning the nature of the human brain and personality, have further exposed the limitations of Marxism as the sole basis for defining the meaning of human existence. That limitation is accentuated by the link between Marxist ideas and institutions in the form of bureaucratic and dogmatic communist parties. Precisely because Marxism as a body of ideas and as a socio-economic method has become so much a part of the Western intellectual heritage, its intellectual vitality and political significance, the latter conceived of in broad terms as a source of influence for social programs, no longer depend on an organization of zealots. Such organization was needed to proselytize, to seize power, and to hold it. Specific Russian conditions led to the Leninist formulation of the historical utility of such a party and of the absolute necessity of subordinating the individual to it. So he's trying to separate Marxism from communism. It sounds like, like, oh, they just did it wrong, and if you did it right, it would be the best system we ever lived in. I wonder if he's gonna pull that old chestnut out of the bag. Continuing. Subsequently, the bureaucratic elements that unavoidably gained control over the organization once it had come to power naturally tended to put a higher priority on the organization than on the ideas that the organization was supposed to uphold and presumably to nourish. Okay, this is a really important idea, I think, in my opinion, because the idea is bureaucracies, and somebody sent me a really interesting video by on a channel that I can't remember now, talking about there's a book, I think it was called The New Class, and it was written by a guy who was living under communism, and he was talking about how this bureaucratic class represented a new class that had their own interests and that had their own goals and agendas. And yet, when you hear people talk about Marxism or communism or socialism, this bureaucratic class is never talked about as a class of its own, right? It's always the capitalists and the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. It's the people who own the factories and the people who work in the factories, and they just leave out this bureaucratic class who are going to administer the system, the new utopia. And of course, they're the people who stand to gain the most, right? The people who get to make the decisions that affect everybody else, and who gets how much rice and how much potatoes go to which village and all that kind of stuff. This bureaucratic class, they're the ones who are often technocratic, but they're the ones who stand the most to gain. And yet they sell the lie that it's going to benefit all the workers, and it's going to be a workers' paradise, and you're going to have unprecedented amount of free time and luxurious access to property and food when it's not owned by any single individual, but we all have our own shares and stake in all of it, and they never really they leave out the fact that it's going to lead to this huge, overwhelmingly bloated bureaucracy of people who don't add anything and don't produce anything, and all they do is consume and soak up and drain the resources. And that's largely what we have. That's basically what government is. It's just a big, convoluted, bureaucratic leviathan, and all it does is take, and then it dishes out a little bit here and there and says, oh, look at the wonderful things that we're doing for you, and the programs and the social benefits that you're getting, and the money that we're giving to needy people, and the food banks and all this kind of stuff. And it's just a con. It's just a con from top to bottom, from inside out. But I think I have a book, actually. It's called The Bureaucratic Leviathan, and it's a study of the bureaucracies in Soviet Russia. That because this is an element that I think doesn't get a lot of attention, so it's good to see Zbig mentioning it here. But continuing. As a result, the existence of communist parties has come to be an effective impediment to the further acceptance and development of Marxist thought. So the existence of the people who are trying to put Marxist thought into action is an impediment to the acceptance and development of Marxist thought. The party's bureaucratic organization, their inherent concern for their institutional vested interests, even at the expense of the Marxist doctrine that they are said to embody, their fear of intellectual exploration, all have cumulatively stimulated both opposition on the outside and ideological sterility on the inside. Characteristic of this sterility is the striking fact that the Soviet Communist Party has not produced a single creative and influential Marxist thinker in the 50 years since it seized power in 1917. Moreover, its leading intellectual lights, the beginnings of whose creativity antedated 1917, were physically liquidated under Soviet rule. This is remarkable, considering the significance officially attached to creative Marxism-Leninism by the first Communist Party ever to have come to power. And, they word these things like, oh, the Communist Party just came to power. Well, it was funded, it was propped up, it was supported, it was allowed, it was given that role to run the system in the place that it did. And it didn't just sort of spontaneously, from the ground up, grassroots style, get together and seize the power, The story, that's an oversimplification, I think. Or at least it's leaving aspects out. So, continuing. As long as Marxism was an isolated school of thought, the party could serve as an effective mechanism for carrying it to the masses and, more generally, as the self-appointed agent of history, the direction of which Marxism claimed to have correctly identified. But once Marxism had become part of the world's historic mainstream, to insist on its separate institutional identity and exclusivity was to diminish its influence and to stifle its creativity. Yet, that is precisely what the Communist parties have continued to do, and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union has even extended that claim by asserting its right to pass on the correctness of other parties' interpretations. The result has been increasing indifference to doctrine among the general membership and increasing disaffection among the more creative Marxist thinkers. This is not to say that socialist ideas have become discredited. On the contrary, even in Eastern Europe, where communism has had to compete with anti-Soviet nationalism, the admittedly limited and very fragmentary data available on public attitudes indicate that socialism, broadly conceived of as an attempt to create a more just society through public welfare, mass access to education, social services, public ownership of the principal means of production, and social egalitarianism, has wide popular support, whereas communism as an institutionalized belief has not. Worth mentioning here at this point that in our reading of the Fabian Freeway and the Milner-Fabian conspiracy as well, what you'll find is the early Fabian socialists saw their movement and their efforts as eventually leading to the spreading of a communistic type of system. Again and again, socialism is described as that transitional phase between capitalism and communism. And you got to read Fabian Freeway to get the full picture on why that is and how that works. But they're not distinct things. It's kind of like an evolving, or it's not, I wouldn't say, I don't want to use that word. It's more like a business plan, to use an Alan Watt-ism. The business plan, right? You want this outcome, but to get that outcome, there's a few stages you have to pass through first to get there. And it's going to be different depending on the country that you are, or the, if you're using business terms, if you're, I just got a cramp in my hand. It's going to be different depending on the target market or the industry that you're operating within. there'll be a different step-by-step process to get your product or your service established in that area or in that market, right? Same kind of thing. And that's covered off very well in the Fabian Freeway book too. So for anyone who hasn't listened to the read-through of that, it's a very good one. Not the read-through, I mean the book is a very good one. And also kind of pricey and hard to find copies of it now. So that's under the playlist tab. And you could listen to that in between your Zbigniew Brzezinski installments. But it's worth mentioning. There's a footnote here. And we'll have a look. He says, data to that effect come from... So data to support this idea that socialism is popular, whereas communism is not. He says, data to that effect come from polls. Ah, good. The old POLL. Taken both within a given country and among Eastern European travelers to the West. Thus, in a 1961 poll conducted in Warsaw among university students, 2% identified themselves as definitely Marxist in outlook and 16% as, on the whole, yes. One may assume that these two categories would represent the upper limit of student willingness to accept the official ideology, although many among the 16% presumably would rebel against excessive party orthodoxy. 27.5% said definitely no, and 31% said on the whole no, to the question, do you consider yourself a Marxist? At the same time, however, 28.1% expressed a definite desire to see the world evolve towards some form of socialism, and 44.5% responded on the whole yes, for a total of 72.6% expressing a generalized preference for socialism. So they asked a bunch of students. Come on, that's a bit of a... You're going to get a bit of a biased outcome, right? You can't really base these kind of things on students. But anyway, let's go back to the text. Similarly, in the West, most non-socialist parties now accept the welfare society as desirable and normal, though not necessarily requiring extensive nationalization. The Catholic Church expressed much the same point of view in the remarkable papal encyclical Mater et Magistra. Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? How this welfare society, which was concocted and advanced, put forward, suggested, marketed, sold to people by socialists who tend to be communist sympathizers, just became accepted. And then it was built and it was rolled out, and now here we are, we have it. And yet our countries are not described as socialist systems. We're told that these are liberal democracies. So, but you can look at it and see that it's wealth distribution, because the wealth gets hoovered up automatically. You don't even get to see it. You don't get to pay it yourself. It just gets taken out of your pay packet by the system, calculates it automatically, takes it out automatically, and then a bunch of people far away decide what that gets spent on and which needy people it's going to get doled out to and in what way. And then, you know, what you see is a lot of funding for certain groups, smaller groups of people based on their maybe religion or their nationality, or their skin color, and overwhelmingly, that's where the money goes. And then native populations tend not to get as much, or a fair proportion or a fair share, and that's kind of part of the wealth distribution mechanism that living under a socialist system results in, right? So I'd say we're in a socialist system, really. When are they going to roll out the full-blown communism? That's the question. But, you know, all these isms really just describe the same system, as I've said before, which is the pyramid, the dominant minority at the top, and everybody else scrapping for survival at the bottom. Only in the future, it's going to be a sort of horrible dystopian techno-feudalism, and but at least we're going to have our drugs and our computer games to keep us entertained. So that's a relief. But back to the text. Oh, we got a comment from Frank who says, yes, Shaw said precisely that on a visit to the Soviet Union. After lauding the Soviet system, he said that Fabianism and socialism is the same as communism. Yeah, that's in the Fabian Freeway book, I'm pretty sure. Or if not, I'm pretty sure it's in the Milner Fabian book. But both those books are worth reading, buying, preserving, learning from. They're excellent, and they go together really nicely. So, back to the text. Accordingly, institutional Marxism or communism no longer confronts an intellectual reality that is hostile either to its social aspirations or even to some of the underlying assumptions. It no longer faces a world that intellectually rejects Marxism, that is, a virgin territory to be attacked by zealous missionaries collectively organized. By the same token, the only historical function of the closed Leninist-type party now appears to be to help communists who are in power to stay in power. As a result, a Marxist thinker can no longer be a communist if he wishes to remain a thinker. The Leninist link between ideas and power, with all the inherent restraints and predispositions toward dogmatism that it involves, drives away from communism both the truth-seeking and the efficiency-seeking intellectuals. The former group, typically the philosophers, humanists, and writers, reacts against the excessive concern with the external active man. It seeks to restore and renew concern with the inner meaning of life and to confront such socio-psychic phenomena as alienation. It also sees a basic incompatibility between the quest for personal freedom that Marxism is said to embody and Marxism's institutionalization as a system of power. The most articulate and moving condemnations of the system have usually come from this group. In non-communist countries, this group also contains much of what has come to be called the New Left, which is intellectually preoccupied with the larger questions concerning the individual. Cohn-Bendit, the radical leader of the French students in 1968, characteristically reserved his sharpest barbs for the French Communist Party. So I'm kind of reading this. I mean, I'll be an absolute hand on heart, tell you the truth right now. I don't know much about Marxism. I haven't read his stuff, his writings, and I'm pretty woolly on being able to explain the differences between socialism and communism and all the isms. I haven't got a good head for that. I'm better at sort of recounting what authors say about those things, and then if it's wrong, it's not my fault. I didn't say it. It was Rose Martin and Juan Ratiu who said it. But the way I'm kind of reading this and interpreting this and what it's making me think of is that Marxism and his writings, that was the ideology which people signed on to, which was used to get people's support to go along with and support the building of the system of control. Okay, it's like when you go into McDonald's, you got the picture of the Big Mac, and it looks juicy and succulent and delicious and perfect. And so you hand over your money and you say, yeah, I'm going to eat that Big Mac. I'll get one of them. I'll order it. I'll support this business. Look at what they're offering. It looks great. It looks tasty. 100% beef. Ooh, yeah, I could do one of those. You fork over your money, which is your support. You've given over your belief in their advertising and the messaging that they're putting out. And then what do you get in return? You get this sad-looking, soggy little chemical and preservative-filled Franken food monstrosity, which looks nothing like it does in the picture, which is put together by some probably pissed off worker who isn't getting paid very much. And it's a disappointing experience overall. You don't get what you are sold in the marketing, and that's kind of what I think has happened here. The Marxism is the beautiful looking succulent triple decker beef burger with the fresh salad and the sauce perfectly just oozing out between the bread, and and the cheese, right? And the perfectly crispy bacon on there. That's the Marxism. But then what you actually get when you sign up to it and you invest in it, that's communism. That's the soggy old kind of chemical-filled crap that they try and pass off as food, you know. Frank also says that Shaw, this is George Bernard Shaw, incredibly could not adequately explain precisely what socialism was or is. And I found that when I looked up the Wikipedia page for democracy, there's no explanation on there of what it is. It's like, oh, lots of people kind of defer and argue and disagree, but nobody really knows what it is. So I think that's common. That is definitely a common thing when it comes to these isms. Doris says, Alan said communism was socialism in a hurry. Nice, I like that one. That's a very good, a good way to think of it. Yeah, but these isms, people, it's marketing. It's a marketing thing. You fill in the details with your imagination, right? Because if you actually rigorously questioned and interrogated the people who are selling you this stuff, that's what you're going to find out. They don't know what they're selling, or at least they're not going to admit that what they're selling you. They're not going to admit to what they are actually selling you, which is some kind of control, slavery, taxation, more government, more bureaucracy, less freedom. Basically, they just wrap it up in these academic-sounding isms, you know. And then Brzezinski comes along and with his highfalutin book and dissects all these ideas as though they are anything like how they are marketed and sold to the masses. But back to the text. Another threat to the established link between ideology and institution is the challenge from the efficiency-seeking intellectuals, typically the economists, the scientists, and the new managers. They are primarily concerned with socioeconomic efficiency, and they see in the elevation of dogmas and in the subordination of ideas to institutions, with the resulting conservative dogmatism, a major impediment to positive social change. Less concerned with the inner man, more preoccupied with satisfying the demands of the external man, they do not pose a head-on challenge to the system. But because their attack is oblique, and because the attackers themselves are becoming both more numerous and socially more indispensable to an industrial society, their challenge is more difficult to suppress. The truth seekers confront head-on. In the case of weaker, more disorganized systems, they have occasionally been successful, only to be later crushed by the application of superior power. The efficiency seekers do not confront, they seek to erode. Both their successes and their defeats, seen in the cycle of communist economic reforms and subsequent retreats, are less visible, less extensive, but perhaps more tangible. At some point, however, even the efficiency-oriented group will have to address itself to the more basic questions concerning the nature of man and the purpose of social existence. Until it does, there is always the likelihood that the ruling elite can at least temporarily succeed in compartmentalizing the scientific community, in extracting its talents, and in corrupting it with a system of rewards, all the while reserving to itself the definition of the larger objectives. The likelihood. I think by likelihood, what he means is one like inevitability. Because that is what science has been used for. It's a scientific system. Science is the new world religion. Frank says, managerialism, a social engineer's paradise. Yes, it's the managers, the technocrats, the world controllers, the era of world controllers, as Aldous Huxley referred to it. And they do it under the guise of science and justifying, and they justify their actions and their overreach by saying, well, the science told us to do it. It used to be God told us to do it. Now it's the science told us to do it because the science says so. That's what's happening. So page 81. He's telling you right there. Continuing. Conscious of this danger and reacting against the dogmatic bureaucratic tradition, contemporary Marxist philosophers have been inclined to assert the primacy of human reason and conscience over vested organizational interests and to point out the inescapable limitations of any ideological framework one may apply to reality. Leszek Kolakowski, writing in 1956, reflected a widespread mood when he attacked the degraded notion of Marxist as no longer meaning, quote, a person who recognizes a definite, meaningful view of the world, but a person of a definite intellectual makeup who is distinguished by his readiness to recognize the views established institutionally. Rejecting institutional Marxism, Kolakowski asserted that party interference in scientific pursuits is by definition un-Marxist, since it contradicts the essence of Marxism, a deliberate, scientific, and rational inquiry aiming at the closest approximation of the truth. In a similar vein, Yugoslav philosophers associated with the Zagreb philosophical journal Praxis, a magazine noted for its insistence that Marxism and institutional truth are contradictory terms, ridiculed the views of a Soviet philosopher who had asserted that the party's central committee formed the best solutions to the most important theoretical questions, including philosophical ones. In his opinion, the most important philosophical task today is the amalgamation of all forces within the socialist camp. In response to the Soviet view, a Yugoslav philosopher noted that, quote, the resolutions passed by the Central Committee are no philosophy whatsoever. Yes, it's reassuring, isn't it, when the people who have adopted these ideologies and support these isms and label themselves ists, Marxists and socialists, and even they can't agree what it is or what it means, or how it looks in reality, or its significance, or what impact it has. So it just goes to show you these man-made artificial systems. They never do what we are told they do. We're given the exoteric account of what these systems are supposed to do and who they are for. But of course, there's an esoteric, a hidden, an underlying, a secondary, a deeper purpose. And that is not advertised so clearly and not debated so furiously in the corridors of academia and politics and talking heads, the magazines, I guess at this time it would have been magazines and journals where these sorts of arguments and discussions played out. Now it's YouTube and Twitter Spaces, X Spaces, apologies. Got to get my terminology right. But very hard to find that esoteric purpose for these systems. And I'm not claiming that I could explain it very well, but the pattern down throughout history is this dominant minority ripping off everybody else again and again and again, and supported by a second layer of either bureaucracy, which is what we kind of have, and I think what we're getting now, or a second layer of aristocracy, lower aristocracy, who defend and support and buffer the higher aristocracy from the unwashed masses. But he's going back and forth here, quoting these different philosophers, and really they're just spinning their wheels, arguing semantics, while the system, I think, did exactly what it was designed to do and worked perfectly as these plans that are put into motion and defined many years ahead of time. They tend to roll out pretty effectively, pretty well. But continuing, More fundamental still has been the challenge to the notion that Marxism as a science of history provides both practical and ethical guides to the future. The more critical revisionists and the more outspoken opponents of the fusion of Marxist thought and a Leninist-type party have challenged that premise as well. Kolakowski put it particularly eloquently. Quote, "A philosophy of history worthy of consideration describes only what has existed, the past, and not the creative future of the historical process. For this reason, those who wish to subordinate their own engagement in future processes to the pronouncements of the philosophy of history are only tourists who write their names on the walls of dead cities. Everybody can, if he wishes, interpret himself historically and discover the determinants to which he was subject in the past, but he cannot do so with respect to the self he has not yet become. He cannot deduce his own future development from the pronouncements of the philosophy of history in which he trusts. To work such a miracle would mean to become the irrevocable past oneself, that is, to cross the river of death, which, the poet says, no one ever sees twice." Back to Brzezinski. Even relatively orthodox Marxist thinkers such as Adam Schaff, who have actively defended the fusion of ideas and institutions, have eventually had to confront the choice between intellectual subordination to institutional loyalty and intellectual integrity at the expense of good standing in the party. Right, so if you want to go after truth and intellectual integrity, then you got no place in the party. In belatedly opting for the latter, Schaff freely conceded that his own thinking could no longer be confined to the conservative, dogmatic, and hence institutional definition of Marxism, and that he now had to acknowledge that his more developed understanding of the sociology of Marxism required reliance on non-Marxist perspectives and insights. So Marxism doesn't, according to this fella, Schaff, Marxism can't even stand on its own. It needs to rely on non-Marxist elements. A mere decade earlier, Schaff had still been one of the most effective orthodox critics of views expounded by his fellow Pole Kolakowski, by the East German Wolfgang Harrick, and by the Yugoslav revisionists. It has been said earlier that Marxism, disseminated on the popular level in the form of communism, represented a major advance in man's ability to conceptualize his relationship to his world. It ended an epoch in man's history that might be called that of historical unconsciousness. It gave man a sense of the social dynamic and stimulated a conscious concern with it. In spite of its materialistic determinism, it carried, and that was the source of much of its appeal, an essentially ethical message. It did so on the basis of a doctrine that asserted that it was derived from a totally rational method of inquiry. Its success, therefore, helped to stimulate a reaction against truths derived from seemingly irrational beliefs and against institutions asserting a monopoly on the truth. But that which was necessary to help terminate the age of historical unconsciousness, especially on a popular level, became counterproductive in the age of science, rapid dissemination, and accelerating change. I think that's a pretty good paragraph there to summarize some of the key ideas and the development of Marxism anyway. Especially this bit about an ethical message, because the road to hell is paved with good intentions and people are doing it for the greater good, and they have to subordinate the individual for the well-being of the collective, right? It's always for good reasons and for beneficial reasons, and because people care so much about the downtrodden and the poor and the needy and the marginalized. So, continuing. Initially, the ideology of a narrowly based, weak, and relatively isolated intellectual class that aspired to harness both history and the popular masses, institutionalized Marxism has become the official doctrine of non-intellectual bureaucrats who are supported by millions, roughly 10% of the adult population in most communist countries, for whom formal membership is more often an expression of conservative social orthodoxy or professional opportunism than an ideological or an intellectual commitment. The professional opportunism bit, you know, doors open if you sign up to the party. It's the same like you join a secret society or join a fraternity of some description. Then you're in a network. The people in that network look out for each other. Doors open. Business comes your way. Opportunities land on your desk. It's the same sort of thing. And that's why you end up with psychopaths and self-serving sociopaths joining these kinds of groups, dominating these kinds of groups. And that might go for all groups, whether it's a religion, political movement, socialist party. It's the ones who can get in and leverage a network of relationships and manipulate people and manage people, say what needs to be said and ask the right questions and don't ask the wrong questions, and are able to shimmy up in those hierarchical pyramid structures. And that's why I say that regardless of the label and the branding and the marketing, it's the same thing over and over again, a pyramidal structure with psychopaths competing and vying and elbowing each other to get to the very tippy top. Because people who are humane and have their humanity intact and have a conscience and tell the truth and do the right thing and are unwilling to compromise their morals to get ahead in a job or an organization or a group or a society, they remain on the lower rungs, and there will be a ceiling to their progress. So I think that professional opportunism is a major component of the kind of people who join this sort of thing. To buttress an institution from which the creative, intellectual content is increasingly drained, the presiding officials have more and more taken refuge in state nationalism as the principal emotional bond with the masses. The effect, paradoxical and cruel in its historical irony, is to make communism in power increasingly reliant on the unconscious and the emotional factors which Marxism had sought to supersede. And Frank Lennon mentions a book, which I haven't read yet because I only got my copy in the post recently. Political Ponerology. Ponerology is the science of, well, not science, but it's the study of evil, right? This copy is the first paperback edition published by Red Pill Press. And it's got a really good cover because you can't really see or make it out very clearly, but when you take a picture, as I did, I took a picture of this and put it on the Telegram chat. You can see at the top right here, there's, actually it's not coming through on the camera. Hang on, there we go. Get a bit of light on that. You can see they've got communism, fascism, and then underneath they've got capitalism. No, not my precious capitalism. Don't criticize that. I'm really excited to read that book. I've heard very good things about it. And Zbigniew Brzezinski himself tried to bury it. It says right here on the back, the third copy was produced after one of the scientists working on the project escaped to America in the 1980s. Zbigniew Brzezinski suppressed it. Boom. Don't know if that's true. I've just read it asserted. But this political ponerology book might fill in the gaps and be full of the kind of information that Zbigniew is leaving out of of Between Two Ages, right? Because he's running cover for a system And he is not going to tell you the true causes of all these things. Instead, he's going to blame the isms and the intellectuals who argue about it, and the impact it's had on man and the man's psyche and the collective man. He always talks about man like we're all the same. It's like we already a hive mind, This is what I noticed when I was reviewing that last chapter. He talks about man's Promethean instinct. Like what? All of us? Like here. Because of this, Marxism appealed simultaneously to man's ethical, rational, and Promethean instincts. So all of us have an ethical, a rational, and a Promethean instinct, apparently. Yeah. So anyway, if that's what it's all about as well, that's a huge part of it, is get rid of the individual and assimilate him into the collective hive mind. But Zbigniew, I'm just going to start calling him Zbigniew. It's much easier to say that than his actual name. Zbigniew just talks about us like we're already a hive mind that's being manipulated by these memes, these ideas, these isms that just spontaneously arise and then capture our collective consciousness for a while and lead to all sorts of problems, right? And that's, I think Zbigniew is running cover for the dominant minority with the hidden, occulted knowledge of civilizational construction and manipulation and control, and that hidden science that they possess of how to manage masses of people all at once and move them along the path you have laid out for them. Doris says, Zbigniew sounds better. Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to stick with that. It's a much easier one to say. Okay, the next section is, hold on to your hats if there's any Christians in the audience, because he's going to talk about organized Christianity. Equally dramatic, though different in substance, is the problem confronted today by established religions, especially Christianity. Unlike communism, contemporary Christianity is no longer a system of power. Its temporal authority is not only limited, but shrinking. I don't know. I mean, the Vatican looks like it's still pretty powerful to me. In certain places, anyway. The other thing he said about Christianity was that it's the most activist religion, and I had a back and forth with other people, and I expressed a bit of doubt on the stream about whether or not that's true, and I don't think it is true. I think there's another religion which does a lot more activism, only it's not done in the name of that religion, if that makes sense. You could probably put two and two together, read between the lines there without me having to risk getting the channel shut down. So, yeah, I'm a bit skeptical about Zbigniew's take on Christianity, but let's see. We'll continue anyway. So he says, the power is waning, and on the other hand, it is both a system of doctrines and an institution, particularly in its Catholic expression. The tension between the beliefs and the institution is ancient, often painful history for the Church, but the problem has been given a new dimension by the efforts initiated by Popes John XIII and Paul VI, and expressed by the Second Ecumenical Council, Vatican II, to reinvigorate the Church. These efforts are taking place in a setting that simultaneously involves both unprecedented interest on the part of concerned Christians, not only Catholics, and widespread evidence of increasing indifference to the prescribed religious forms. In other words, there is both massive involvement in change, which means that the official guardians of the institution cannot fully control it, and uncertainty concerning the best ways to make the Church again truly relevant without diluting its spiritual identity. The fundamental dilemma confronted by the Church, in the words of Unamuno, is that, quote, Catholicism oscillates between mysticism, which is the inward experience of the living God in Christ, and intransmittable experience, the danger of which, however, is that it absorbs our own personality in God, and so does not save our vital longing between mysticism and the rationalism which it fights against. It oscillates between religionized science and the scientificized religion. To opt for one is to be deprived of the other, yet neither will do by itself. Mysticism would mean withdrawal from the contemporary world. Scientism would mean absorption by it. So again, it's back to that thing I was saying earlier, balance, you know? Be in the world but not of it, I think, is a biblical quote, if I'm not mistaken. If anyone knows the book, chapter, and verse, then drop it in the chat. But it's that pendulum, and it's the dialectic as well. It's like either nothing in this place matters, it's all an illusion, it's just a hologram, it's just the, you know, it's like it's a simulation, and it's all fake, and only the afterlife is real, or there is no afterlife, and everything here is the only thing that matters. Matter, you know, solid matter is all that matters, and life here is the only thing you get, and then after this, there's nothing. And people tend to be funneled into one or two of these positions. Truth's going to be somewhere in the middle. It does matter what happens here, but there's also more to it that happens and occurs beyond and after this realm, this place, this experience, whatever you want to call it. But not as many organizations and institutions teaching that. I wonder why. Continuing, this is an old dilemma for the church, and it has been posed and answered in different ways at different historical stages. Mater et Magistra and Vatican II, occurring in an age shaped by ideological conflict, scientific innovation, mass popular awakening, political passion, and religious quiescence, can be viewed as an effort to satisfy three broad objectives. First, to update the church's institutional structure so that it is not an impediment to the vitality of the ideological component, to use a term applied throughout the chapter, and so that the institutionalized beliefs again become meaningful to both the inner and external dimensions of human life. Second, better to focus the energies of the church as a whole on social problems that range from personal poverty and social injustice to international inequality. And finally, to heal doctrinal splits within Christianity and end the era of bigotry and conflict between Christianity and non-Christian religions. The effort, precisely because it did move the church somewhat in the desired directions, produced new strains in the relationship between ideas and institutions. Institutional reform, conducted at a time when pressures for theological adjustments have increasingly come from the church hierarchy itself, as in the case of communism, these pressures have more often come from the periphery than from the center. What Yugoslavia has been to the Kremlin, the Netherlands has become to the Vatican! Exclamation point. In case you're wondering why I put a bit of emphasis on the word Vatican there. Has, wow, these sentences are so ridiculously long. Okay, let me redo this sentence and skip the parentheses. Institutional reform, conducted at a time when pressures for theological adjustments have increasingly come from the church hierarchy itself, has prompted a profound crisis of papal authority. Pope Paul's reiteration of the ban on artificial contraception, which came shortly after the adoption by Vatican II of the concept of collegiality in church affairs, provoked strong negative reactions from various national councils of bishops. These reactions, in turn, prompted the pontiff to warn against attitudes which departed more than a little from the traditional doctrine of the church and menaced order in the bosom of the church herself. Yet the Vatican could not stifle the theological unrest. Almost echoing the demands of Marxist philosophers for an unfettered Marxist dialogue, Catholic theologians denounced efforts by the Vatican Curia to resolve theological issues by administrative fiat. They asserted their right to complete freedom of inquiry, subject to no institutional limitations whatever. The increased emphasis on social questions, articulated with compassion in Mater et Magistra, presented a different challenge. Intense involvement in the affairs of the world, and particularly in the struggle against social injustice, could not help but focus the attention of the church on external man, often placing the church in direct competition with socialist or communist movements. Younger, more socially involved Catholics saw in that competition, especially in Latin America, the only possible salvation for the church's mission. Conservatives feared the transformation of the church into merely another temporal, radical movement. Particularly bitter was the conflict in those areas where the issue had immediate relevance, such as northeast Brazil. There, as elsewhere, conservatives felt that what the church would gain in the short run would cost it too much in the long run. Social relevance would be gained at the cost of loss of identity. More generally, they argued that social success, no less than economic success, could be detrimental to spiritual values. It may be assumed that from their point of view, the experience of Protestantism in the United States was not reassuring. Ecumenism also prompted by both institutional and doctrinal tension. And I believe ecumenism is a sort of kind of like the Trilateral Commission, which led to the standardization, homogenization of the cultures and the systems of America, Europe, and Japan. Ecumenism is a similar thing across religions. It ties them all together, and it's like, really, we at our core, we are all the same thing, you know, and we have to put aside our differences and our petty little squabbles and our, all those murdering that we did of each other back in the day, and let's unite, and it's this smooshing together, and standardization and homogenization of religion, and I think the Rockefellers have played a big role in the funding and development and the support and the advancement of ecumenism. General Meow Meow says Zoro Judah Christian Islam. Zoro Judah Christlam. There you go. Yeah, that's a good one. That's it. That's what we're heading into. Zoro Judah Christlam Hindism. Yeah, it's nuts. So, ecumenism also led to some tensions. Zbigniew says, now that I'm saying Zbigniew, I'm wondering how many times in the previous videos I said Zbigniew and didn't catch myself saying it. So, because I bet it happened multiple times and I realized that I'd said that. But anyway, Zbigniew says, purists feared that it would accelerate the dilution of doctrinal content and transform the Catholic Church in the more advanced countries into a vague, ethical organization engaged together with other similar bodies in social good works. So even the church is just becoming a socialist outfit. Even more perplexing to the purists was the appearance of an ecumenical dialogue between Christians and communists, in which Catholics took an active part. That such a dialogue could develop, even though it received relatively little notice, was itself proof of the extent to which exclusivistic claims to absolute truth, though not formally abandoned by either side, no longer dominated either the Western mind or even those institutions that were themselves the products of the Manichaean tradition. There's some massive footnotes and that I'm just moving past because, but I'll get them on camera just in case you want to pause the video and look at them. I could even probably zoom in a little bit for you there. There you go. There's the footnotes for that page. If you want to pause and read them, feel free to do so. Melissa says, see the history of liberation theology and the history of Catholics in Latin America. Ecumenism was promoted by Malachi Martin at Vatican II on behalf of the you-know-whos. I've got a Malachi Martin book somewhere. I think it's about the Jesuits. Or maybe that's somebody else. I can't spot it now. Yeah, I'm not sure where it is. Anyway, he did some books though, didn't he? I think. Right. Continuing. It would, however, be misleading to construe this dialogue as a fundamental breakthrough in the doctrinal relationship between Christianity and Marxism. The participants involved were individuals who, given their intellectual concerns, themselves reflected the tension between institutions and ideas. They to my mind, Marxism, like a materialistic, atheistic, economic, class-based worldview, is not going to be able to interface with a religious worldview that takes into account things like spirit and metaphysics and just other dimensions that can't be measured with rulers and mechanical instruments, right? So seems like it was doomed from the start from my point of view, but at least they gave it a go, I suppose. But he says, both sides thus represented the intellectual fringes and not the centers of bureaucratic power. The centers themselves displayed some ambivalence, not so much about the meetings, which they tolerated in part for reasons of political tactics, but about the degree to which differences between the two systems of thought were said to have been obscured by the respective spokesman. And there's a whole bunch of footnotes on this page as well that I'm going to skip over. Do forgive me. But that text is so tiny, it adds much more time. There we go. He says, these limitations notwithstanding the discussion. Yeah, it's funny that he mentions the very centers of bureaucratic power were sort of whatever. Yeah, have your conversations and have your disagreements. It doesn't matter because here, at the top of the pyramids of control, both we're more concerned with the esoteric stuff that's going on that we're aware of. You can all have your arguments about the exoteric stuff. That's fine. You keep you busy, have at it. So it's curious that he mentions that. Continuing, he says, these limitations notwithstanding, the discussions, which doubtless will continue and expand, had broad significance. They indicated that it is becoming increasingly difficult to confine the search for a more meaningful universal vision within institutionally defined frameworks, since the very existence of the institutions depends on the maintenance of their distinctive and exclusive identity. That is why what appears on the surface to be modest and limited has in fact been a major step away from the traditional Western view of such dialogue as anathema. There you go. And Melissa confirms that it is Malachi Martin that wrote the Jesuits book. Thank you. And that it's a good book. Mindhack says, some good Malachi Martin books out there, but an interview triggered me. He said if parents are Satanists and they sell their souls to Satan, they are damned. That doesn't seem right. Or their kids are damned, sorry. Oh, so if you're born into a satanic family and your parents sell your soul, then you're going to be damned. Yeah, that doesn't seem right to me. I don't think a loving and caring and just God would let that happen. Right, continuing. The reforms and the debates within Catholicism have already had the effect, in many areas of personal life, of supplanting the authority of the institution by the rule of one's conscience. Such, for example, has been the reaction of many bishops and Catholic laymen to the issue of birth control. To a spiritually motivated person, conscience can be a stricter teacher than church authority. But for most people, reliance on conscience inescapably has the effect of making the church increasingly irrelevant. Can't have that, can we? You've got to keep those donations coming in. It was this dilemma which more and more led Pope Paul VI to adopt a position in spite of his earlier commitment to innovation, molded by the need for institutional defense. Quote, today, as anyone can see, orthodoxy, that is the purity of doctrine, does not seem to occupy first place in the psychology of Christians. How many things, how many truths are questioned and put up to doubt? How much liberty is claimed as regards the authentic heritage of Catholic doctrine, not only in order to better explain it to the man of our time, but at times to subject it to that relativism in which profane thought seeks its new expression, or to adapt it to contemporary taste and the receiving capacity of modern mentality? That was actually a question, even though I didn't enunciate it as a question. It was a very long and complicated question. But interesting that things can be malleable and can change. You would think that these things actually do embody relativism when a new pope can be, it's not elected, is it? Chosen? I don't know, selected. And then he can come in and change things. And he can say, well, we're doing it this way now, or we believe in this thing now, or, well, we just forget about that bit that we used to do, and now we're doing it this way. And this is the nature of these systems. They morph, they change, they're chameleon-like, they adapt. And as I mentioned at the start of the stream, our memories are eroded and impaired, and we forget, and we adapt, and we go along with it, and we think it's always been that way. And you know, we're shockingly close to 1984, wherein people just overwrite their memory with the new information and then just say, well, it's always been that way. I'll give you a good example. Recently, autumn seemed to land really early where I am, and the leaves on the tree started changing color like mid-August, and the leaves were falling down. And I thought, that's really unusual. It's too early for that to happen. And I was talking to someone about it, and he said, oh yeah, well, it's that phenomenon that happens when you have a really dry summer, and then it makes autumn arrive early. And I've never heard of this phenomenon. I don't study the weather. I'm not a weather guru, right? But the way this person said it to me, it was like everyone knows about the hot summer leading to an early autumn phenomenon. And I'm sure that this person had probably just heard that explanation earlier in the week, probably on the news or in some podcast, and was now repeating it like, well, everyone knows that's always been the way it's always been, right? And that's just an example. And I could be wrong. Maybe that is a true phenomenon that everyone's aware of, and I'm just not, because I don't really care about the weather that much. But it struck me as potentially an example of that rewriting of common sense and common knowledge, and just the folding in of new information, and then just without questioning it, like downloading it, right? To put the correct term on it. I felt like this phenomenon had just been downloaded into this person, and here he was just telling me, well, everyone knows that dry summers cause early autumns. So that was just an example of it. And I think it happens all the time. But it shows you what the institution is worth, what the religion is worth, what the ideology and the worldview is worth when they are relativist, when they are adapting and changing and having to keep up with, what does he say, the psychology of Christians. Because the psychology of Christians, that's managed and manipulated and molded. And they're having to keep up so that they can stay relevant, keep those donations coming in, keep sitting back on their laurels and enjoying the good life off the backs of the labor and the sweat and the, what do you call it? Yeah, the productivity of the people who actually do the work. All right, let's continue. The Pope was right in noting that orthodoxy does not seem to occupy first place in the psychology of Christians. This is so not only on the level of formal, overt compliance with certain established rituals, but even in regard to the more basic substance of belief, as is shown by Table 8, constructed from 1968 Gallup polls. The relatively low level of regular church attendance, while significant in revealing increasing disregard for the most basic but also the minimal ritualistic requirement, was not as revealing as the striking gap between those who believe in God and those who believe in life after death. The essence of the Christian faith is that the former guarantees the latter. God without belief in life after death is something entirely different from the Christian God. The poll data, though fragmentary and superficial, nevertheless highlight a problem. On the one hand, the poll indicates a crisis of institutionalized belief. On the other hand, however, it suggests that it would be misleading to conclude that low church attendance and disbelief in life after death mean pervasive irreligiosity. On the contrary, it suggests that authentic irreligiosity, that is to say, a deeply felt rejection of a reality beyond the finite, does not exist, or at least not yet. So the poll there, the table, you can see you got different countries. 3 questions. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in life after death? Do you attend church once per week? And then the percentages of people who answered yes. And much higher for the first question, do you believe in God? And then dropping off for the second question, do you believe in life after death? Which is interesting. That's a really good point. I would have thought everyone who believes in God believes in life after death. So curious. And but yeah, a significant drop off, like for most of these, 30%, 20 to 30%, 40% in some cases. And then do you attend church once a week? Again, another drop off quite a bit by another 20 or 30%. But again, who did they ask and under what circumstances? And did they ask the same bunch of students that they surveyed in the other one? And that you've always got to ask that question and take that into account, haven't you? He says, a belief in God to which one cannot give substance may merely be a holdover from a more traditional society in a context that emphasizes immediate life, but it could also reflect the search for a highly personal, inner, and direct relationship between the individual and God. Nice. How much we got left? All right, I think we can finish this. We can get up to part 3, and then we'll wrap it up. So the last section we got here is privatization of belief. In fact, the waning of the church as an institution may be a symptom of intensifying religiosity. The church was a necessary intermediary between God and man. Was it? In the phase of man's spiritual poverty and historical unawareness. It provided a rigid code of behavior, institutionalized sanctions, which gradually declined in severity as mankind was socialized on the level of personal, though not international, coexistence. Yeah, we're going through with the international socialization currently, aren't we? It hadn't got into full swing in the 1970s when Zbigniew was writing this, but I think we're there now, pretty much, with all the children getting their global citizen training and their rainbow flags and their United Nations human rights. There's a school near me, and it has a giant banner on the perimeter fence, because all schools have these prison-like perimeter fences around them now. And on the perimeter fence around this school, there's a giant banner, and it says something like, "We are a UNESCO children's rights school." Something like that. It says that they support the children's rights as defined by UNESCO, and that's like a key selling point for this school, apparently. That so much so that they want to put this banner on the perimeter fence outside, and presumably to advertise to all the parents who might be wanting to send their children there. But yeah, they're a UNESCO school, and they support children's rights. So we are going through that process now, I think, of being socialized to the international level, because, as he mentioned in the previous section, this rolling out of nationalism. Prior to that, we were just in clans and communities. We didn't really care so much about the country, and so we had to have our consciousness upgraded to that level, and that had to happen before we could be upgraded to the international level, to the global, to the world level, right? As I said, you got to do these things in steps and stages. You can't just go from little people living in their clan in the village and then being like, right, you're a global citizen now. you're a world citizen and you have to act accordingly. That's like upgrading from Windows XP to Windows 11, right? You got to do all the upgrades in between to prep and prepare and to make it coherent and make the future upgrades stick. I heard Alan Watt talking about whether injections would take to a person who received one. And it's the same sort of thing with the upgrades to our social conditioning and our worldview and our subconscious programming. You know, these programs have to take, and they only take if they have the appropriate preparation has been done beforehand, and the correct step-by-step formula has been followed. So it's that kind of thing. But yeah, we were socialized, you know, and that begs the question: who did, by whom, you know, socialized by whom? Did we socialize ourselves, or was it that, you know, Charles Galton Darwin's untamed minority of wild humans socializing and taming the rest of us? You know, he doesn't. That just the use of that word, it implies somebody who's doing the socializing, just like you would break a wild horse or tame a puppy, right? But he writes in such a way that most people just gloss over that and not really ask that question or think too much about it. But we were socialized to the level of nation, not quite to the level of the international level back in 1970, but I would argue that today we've pretty much got to that point. Back to the text. So we're talking about the church and what it used to do and what it used to provide for people, and how the waning of church might be a sign of intensifying religiosity. So not contradictory, but counterintuitive to make that claim. But we'll just recap this sentence. It provided a rigid code of behavior, institutionalized sanctions, and a link to the eternal. As the church fades, for some, the disintegration of its controls will doubtless mean license. For many, it will simply be a matter of indifference. But for others, it will be the beginning of a much more direct, more personal, less ritualized relationship to God. If you're going to be in any of these categories, I would suggest you get into this third category here. You know, this could mean the emergence of highly pluralistic religious responses, of cults, sects, believers groups, each with a somewhat different form of expressing its faith, to say nothing of a much more personalized form of worship, even within the Catholic Church. For most people, the organized church will continue to provide the basic mooring, but for many, the relationship to God will be expressed much more individually and in keeping with their specific intellectual and psychological needs. The popularity of Teilhard de Chardin is, for example, symptomatic of our age's felt need to combine ecstasy with science, mystic belief with knowledge of the material world. And this Teilhard de Chardin was mentioned and quoted quite extensively in the previous chapter as well. The present ferment in Christianity is hence part of the general aversion toward the institutionalized belief that characterizes our time. This aversion reflects the nature of our intellectual style and the fragmented and impressionistic way we ourselves become exposed to reality, as well as the instinctive feeling that ideas are only relevant as long as they can successfully relate to a reality that is dynamic. To institutionalize an idea is to impede its capacity to adjust to change. The further evolution of the idea then becomes dependent not on the capacity of the mind to sense the speed and the significance of change, but on the rate of change within the bureaucratic organization which has come to embody the idea. Vested power interests thus become more important than either ethical or intellectual imperatives. I think he's making good points here, right? But I don't think any of these institutions were ever put in place to last forever. I think they're all part of the business plan as well. Stepping stones, right? To fleece humanity, and while at the same time upgrading humanity and preparing them for the next stage, the next step. He says, the crisis of institutionalized beliefs is the last. So he's making it out like these things were built and established to solve a problem permanently, right, and to last. And he's, in my opinion, hiding the fact that they were never built to last. They were always built to be temporary. I think that's the neglected aspect that he's leaving out of his thesis. This is why you got to read political ponerology in tandem with this book to get the missing bits. But let's continue. The crisis of institutionalized beliefs is the last stage in the progressive secularization of life. That is, in the detachment of one's social existence from a framework of belief. Work, play, and now increasingly introspection have gradually separated themselves from formal Christian belief. Yeah, they separated themselves. These abstract concepts of work, play, and introspection have just gained autonomy and have chosen to distance and separate themselves. You know, this is another classic tactic and method of these kind of writers is they'll write in such like that's have separated themselves. That's personification of abstract things, right? Work and play and introspection, they don't have agency. They can't take actions, right? Because they're not living things. But he describes them as separating themselves from formal Christian belief. And what he's doing is he's hiding, he's covering up the social engineers, the dominant minority, the untamed wild men who do this kind of thing. Because this is what they do. It's like right now, at this stage of the business plan, we need work, play, and introspection. We need to separate that from Christianity because we're gonna run Christianity into the ground and prepare people for the New Age and the next stage and the next and the Gaia worship and the Earth religion, right? So by using this kind of language, he's running cover, as I've said so many times in this series, for that dominant minority. So, work, play, introspection separated themselves from formal Christian belief, and they are beginning to detach themselves from Marxism under communism as well. It was easier to establish institutional belief in an age of geographical, cultural, and hence also psychological isolation. Religious fanaticism could thrive in such a context, and religious wars had profound moral meaning. Physical exhaustion, after the 30 Years' War and after the Battle of Vienna of 1683, as well as growing skepticism, have made religious wars unfashionable. In our age, communism has been the last great absolutist dogma, for it could use power to assure exclusiveness. It is not accidental that isolated China has lately been its most fanatic proponent, or that ideological conservatism in the communist states is usually accompanied by efforts to cut society off from contact with the external world by radio jamming and other devices. Yeah, like kind of the Great China Firewall as well, right? Global congestion, though not necessarily conducive to mutual comprehension, is still inimical to institutions and ideologies relying on exclusivistic conviction. Ideally, in this setting, man should seek complete fulfillment by combining spiritual introspection with the moral imperative of social justice. Harvey Cox argues in his thoughtful book that if men rather than metaphysical phantoms bear the meaning of historic life, then purposes other than those of one's own clan can be appreciated rather than repudiated. Separate worldviews present the occasion not for mutual destruction, but for fashioning a societal framework within which such variance can be encouraged and nourished. Ideally, the secular city is such a society. It provides a setting in which a hodgepodge of human purposes and projects can thrive because each recognizes itself as provisional and relative. Authentic secularity demands that no worldview, no tradition, no ideology be allowed to become the officially enforced worldview, beside which no others are tolerated. This, in turn, requires pluralistic social and political institutions. Very interesting food for thought in this little section. Because he says earlier in the book, I mean, I know this isn't Zbigniew's words here, but he says earlier in the book that nature, he reveals the nature of cities being what does he say? It's here. He quotes, urban growth has not been deliberately designed to improve the quality of life. He says overcrowding in animals leads to distorted, neurotic, and downright pathological behavior. And we can be sure the same is true in principle of people. City life today is definitely leading to mass mental disease, to growing vandalism, and possible eruptions of mass violence, all known and all by design. So this pushing of pluralism is basically, in a word, relativism, right? Your worldview is yours. Your truth is your truth. My truth is my truth. And we have to respect and live side by side, which is all well and good telling people to do that until it isn't, right? Because you're just, like I said, taking away people's ability to compete with each other on the battlefield of ideas and to adapt and change, take in better ideas, let go of crappy ideas, and do it with good intentions, with the goal of having a win-win outcome. Win-win in the case of two people being involved in a dispute or a disagreement, right? What you have instead is everyone's got their own little precious worldview, informed by their lived experience and their emotional state being the little precious pearl that they have to cling to and protect at all times. And it just leads to solipsism, self-centeredness, and it just leads to chaos ultimately, because nobody really understands anybody else. There's no commonality to things for people to build relationships on top of. And it's a real hodgepodge, hit and miss type of experience trying to exist in these societies where everyone's random, crazy, made up opinions and views and experiences and ideas about things and worldviews are all to be respected and are all to coexist simultaneously, right? It just has to lead to conflict and friction at some point eventually, particularly when the food runs out or the lights go off or the water stops running or some other such tragedy, manufactured or otherwise, strikes. So this is an interesting point. A lot of food for thought there about the nature of cities, secularism, the abandonment of objective truth and the pursuit of that, the total schooling, retardation, and the slowing down of people's ability to discern truth and seek it and go after it and separate fact from fiction. That's gone. And what it does to people living in cities, surrounded by a bunch of other people who are all steeped in solipsistic relativism. So, continuing, the shaping of the ideal secular city demands enormous social maturity and responsibility. It also calls for philosophical depth and a sense of restraint, since the transition from the tradition of dogma to the condition of diversity is not easy. Diversity of belief is certainly the prerequisite for freedom. And it may even be the concomitant of creativity. though the Middle Ages as well as the Orient argue against it, but carried to its extreme to the point at which diversity itself becomes the substance of belief. It creates its own dangers. The healthy reaction against institutionalized doctrines is not complete unless it also involves the formulation of alternative principles of social contract and alternative views of the role of the individual. Fluid, fragile, and fragmentary ideas cannot provide either lasting insight or an enduring basis for action. Popular notions, shifting with the wind, may accurately reflect the underlying psychological and social tensions of our rapidly changing reality, but do they provide an enduring basis either for understanding it or for mastering it? Intellectual relativism may not suffice to meet the challenge of subjective activism, which is intensely intolerant because it is derived from purely personal criteria for evaluating reality. This problem not only arises in systems in which formalized beliefs play a decisive role, it also confronts the Western liberal democratic states. These, too, depend on a symbiosis of ideas and institutions, though in much less formal, more implicit ways. The turbulence afflicting communism and Christianity is visible and direct, with restless ideas confronting unyielding institutions. The crisis of allegiance to liberal democracy is much more elusive, but not less real. The effective working of a liberal democratic state requires a combination of social devotion to the abstract idea of democracy, which you'll remember is in crisis because we've got a bit too much of it, according to Trilateral Commission's book, The Crisis of Democracy, which wasn't published at this time, to be fair. But he says, I'll just recap that sentence. He says, the effective working of a liberal democratic state requires a combination of social devotion to the abstract idea of democracy and of legalism in practice that can easily be strained by conditions of stress and crisis. A democratic process, moreover, is difficult to dramatize, in contrast to such notions as revolution, injustice, and freedom. Well, I mean, because the democratic process is walk into a cubicle and put an X in a box. The end. So no, it's not very dramatic, is it? Compared to like chopping off the heads of tyrants, for example. Instead, it calls more prosaically for a high degree of procedural commitment. So yeah, more bureaucracy. I don't know how you can be prosaic about a procedural commitment, but there you are. Try and make it sound all romantic and fantastic so that people will be willing to go and die for it. That is, he says, a concern with the means as well as with the end of the process. Unless infused with new moral content, I don't know where that's going to come from, because when in a world of subjectivism, relativism, you got moral relativism is just not going to fly. Unless infused with new moral content, procedural commitment may not suffice in a confrontation with issues that are posed as absolutes and that are said to require passion rather than procedure for their resolution. All right, that's the end of part 2, chapter 2. I really enjoyed that last, I would say, sort of 2-3 paragraphs there. A lot of food for thought, a lot of interesting comments and ideas kind of all thrown in, smooshed together. But diversity of belief is a prerequisite for freedom. That I could chew on that one for many, many hours. It's an interesting idea. And I don't have anything clever or interesting to say about it right now. I just wanted to underline it and draw people's attention to it. Because, you know, if you believe that you have to, I don't know, murder kittens in order for the rain to come and water your garden, right? That's diversity of belief. But, you know, do we need that? Do we need that in the society and in the culture and in the community? And do we have to respect it? Oh, that's just Terry. You know, he murders kittens every Friday because he thinks it causes rain. the waters his plants in the garden. You know what I mean? So diversity of belief. Yeah, where does it end? How far do you take it? How far do you respect it? And that's what I was talking about with this comment on cities, secularism, relativism, differing worldviews, my lived experience. What was it? What, page 74, where he says was it here? Yeah, he says no, it wasn't. Hang on. Yeah, it was 74, where he talks about the elusiveness, the relativity and the elusiveness of truth. In my opinion, in that sort of worldview, if you teach that to people, if you allow people to take action based on this idea that truth is relative and elusive, then you're just constantly going to have conflict, pain, suffering, strife, stress, struggle. But I think that is the point. Thank you very much. That is the end of that section. Coming up next is, I don't even know where it is. Where is it? The next bit. Coming up next is histrionics as history in transition. So I'm sure that is going to be another delightfully easy and simple and not at all complicated section of the book. I'm going to have a swig and then we'll do a few closing thoughts. Lovely. Frank said, Nick, while I think of it, will you check to see if your Milner-Fabian conspiracy series is publicly showing through? Was searching for it earlier but could not locate it. Yes. Check Rumble and Odyssey. It should definitely be on there. YouTube is sending me notifications saying, we've switched your playlist into a podcast. We've switched your eligible playlist into a podcast. And I didn't ask it to do that. And now I don't know how to switch it back. So that might be what's causing the problem, Frank. If you can't see Milner-Fabian conspiracy here on YouTube, you could grab it from Rumble and Odyssey, or I will get in the settings and have a look and see if I can get to the bottom of that, because, yeah, strange. Tammy says, weird. I'm in another country, but also having an early fall. And that gives me a clue as to what country you're in, because you use the word fall instead of autumn. Yeah, it's strange. It's and then we were getting these kind of like resurgences of summer where it would go really hot and dry again suddenly. And, I think it's just messing with the weather, of course, spraying and whatever other ways they do that. I think it's totally by design. But everybody knows that a dry summer leads to an early autumn. And nobody's piped up in the chat to say, yes, that is a phenomenon that everyone is aware of, and it's just you that didn't know that, Nick. So I think that might just be one of these explanations they throw out there through the mainstream that people just download and adopt and repeat without giving it any thought, like, why have I never heard of that before? And, they do the reverse. They'll badger you with something, and then it'll disappear, like acid rain and the hole in the ozone layer. So they'll memory hole things, and then they'll also Mandela effect things as well. So that you'll download it and then say, well, yeah, of course, it's always been that way. Of course, there's always been lines across the sky and tic-tac-toe patterns and five-pointed stars. That's the way the sky's always looked, It's alarming. It's amazing. It's scary. It's frightening. It's freaky. It's also very exciting and interesting because it gives me something to talk about in my live streams. I don't know what I would do a channel about otherwise. Before doing this, it had never, ever occurred to me to create content or make a channel on YouTube. Never, not even once. Never even entered my mind to do this. But then, we got lockdowns, a big C event was kicked off, and now here I am, and here we are, and that's wonderful, really. It's given me something to talk about, so got to be grateful from that point of view, right? So, yeah, another good section. We made really good progress tonight. I'm glad we started the reading a little bit early because it allowed us to get to the end of that fairly long section. Next one, we're going to be doing page 95 up to page 111. That'll be easy enough. That's quite a short section. 16 pages. And then there's a section in the next chapter called The Quest for Equality. So, yeah, it's interesting to see these words, these buzzwords appear in these kinds of books. Diversity, equality, very, very familiar to us now in the present day, 2025. Not so much back then in the 60s and 70s. And I'm reminded as well of the final closing words of Tragedy and Hope. Which is worth showing you if you haven't read it or you haven't seen them. And I haven't read the whole thing, I'll confess. It's a ridiculously huge book. But I dip in and out of it. And actually, I was dipping in and out of it earlier this week. And I didn't know this, but Carol Quigley recommends the book Foundations, Their Power and Influence in here. And he talks about the foundations and the Reese Committee and the findings. I was quite surprised. Yeah, so the closing, let's get the book count back because I'm just talking about buzzwords and, you know, how long these buzzwords have been, what they mean now versus what they haven't always had the significance that they have now. But so this is Tragedy and Hope. This is the reprint, but it was published in 1966. Page 1310, we have the conclusion. All well and good. But then he talks about at the end, the hope of the 20th century rests on its recognition that war and depression are man-made and needless. Well, yes, it's our fault, isn't it? It's always our fault, as men. But he says at the very end that, this last sentence here, where does it start? Some things we clearly do not yet know, including the most important of all, which is how to bring up children, to form them into mature, responsible adults. But on the whole, we do know now, as we have already shown, that we can avoid continuing the horrors of 1914 to 1945. And on that basis alone, we may be optimistic over our ability to go back to the tradition of our Western society and to resume its development along its old patterns of inclusive diversity. Did you know Carol Quigley was woke? You do now. So there you are, inclusive diversity. That is the culminating conclusion of Tragedy and Hope, and maybe that's why we're seeing so much of it rammed down our throats in 2025. I'm going to call it there. We've been going an hour and a half. Wonderful to have you on the live stream. Hope you enjoyed watching on the replay. If you did it that way, please consider like, comment, share, subscribe, do all that wonderful stuff. I don't think I get much help from the algorithm, although somebody did show me that if you search The Next Million Years, Charles Galton Darwin PDF, at least on some browsers, it will kick back a link to my Odyssey page where I did a read-through of that book, which is pretty cool. And I think searches for Milner Fabian conspiracy can also lead back to the Hayes Reviews channel, which is pretty good as well. So it does pay to read some of these more obscure books from time to time. Thank you for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Whatever it is you do, find some time for a creative pursuit. Get off the screens for a little bit. Don't unplug, just unplug from the fear and the outrage and the gore and the violence. It's all psychic driving. It's all emotional manipulation. It's all mind control. So switch it off. Maybe you could accidentally drop your phone in the toilet on purpose. Or, I don't know, leave it on the street and reverse your car over it or something like that. Oh, I did want to mention on the top, when I was showing you this, the Black Mirror with the front-facing cameras that are all ubiquitous these days. This phone, which I have and I've been trialing recently and I really like, does not have a front-facing camera on it, and it's got an e-ink screen, like the old Amazon Kindles Touch. The Amazon Touch Kindles had an e-ink screen, and I think it's a pretty fantastic little gadget. I'll turn the light up on it. It's got an e-reader, so you can see there are all the apps on it. you can't install new apps. There's no app store. There's no way to, you can uninstall the apps that are there, but these are the only apps you can have on it. And there's an e-reader, and I've been reading The Blackening of Europe, Volume 2 by Claire Ellis. It's quite a terrifying experience. But this phone does not have a front-facing camera. For that reason, I like it. I will recommend it. I will endorse it. It's by a company called Mudita, M-U-D-I-T-A. It's got also this nifty button on the side. You can see there it's click to red. So when it's click to red, that just locks the phone down. No signals going in, no signals coming out. And then you just flick it up, and that switches it onto phone mode. And you can see the signal kicking in at the top there. And if I hit that button, it just goes boom, you're offline, and it just disconnects you from everything. Good little piece of kit. I'm not sponsored by them in any way. I saw it I backed it on Kickstarter, and I'm a really big fan of it. It's good, and you can take pictures with it, set alarms, phone calls, text messages. You can't browse the internet though, which is fantastic. So you can load up some ebooks on there and read on the go. And there's an app for chess. You might have seen that. So if you're into your phone games, you can play one that might actually make you a better strategist and make you a bit smarter. But yeah, it's a good little gadget, and a massive decrease of surveillance and data gathering and all that kind of crap stuff that comes with the Nokias, and not the Nokias, sorry, the Samsungs and the Apple phones and all the others. So that's an option if you are too e-tarded. If you are too e-tarded to jailbreak and bootload and side strap and whatever the terminology is, to put Linux or a Lineage operating system onto an old Motorola Android phone, if you're not into all that stuff, then you could consider buying one of these privacy phone. It's not a privacy phone really. It's just I don't know what it is. E-Ink phone by Mudita. I think it's great. So that's my little impromptu pitch for Mudita. Maybe I'll get a sponsorship and start making some money if they see this. Who knows? But yeah, like, comment, share, subscribe, please. And allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Buy me a coffee, send me a little donation, join the book club. It's still under construction, but I've been working really hard, and we're getting close to launching some very exciting stuff. But any support in any way, shape, or form is very much appreciated. And my email address is there too. If you want to get in touch, recommend a book, ask me a question, give me some feedback, positive, negative, neutral. It's all welcome. I would like to hear from people. And I'm going to leave it there. So thank you all very much. It's great to have you here. It's an amazing journey that we are on. It's humbling, and really fills my heart that people tune into this stuff. So yeah, have a good one. Take care of yourselves and each other. See you next week. God bless.